Hello everyone! Before we get into the video, if you're brand new here, be sure to subscribe. Also be sure to leave a like to support the channel. Let's begin. Alright, so today I am bringing back comic book breakdowns / reviews, and today we'll be analyzing a graphic novel that came out almost 2 years ago related to the Power Rangers universe titled Sins of the Future. Now, how this is going to work is I'll be breaking down this graphic novel in various parts, and I will break it down like I would a book, chapter by chapter, and then eventually I'll upload a longer version of the video titled The Full Story. Now, keep in mind here, I've just read this book very recently, which, depending on when I upload this, it might be a few days prior, because I ordered it through Prime shipping on Amazon and got it in like a day, because I'm meeting Jason Font this weekend since he's part of the Power Rangers Protection Program to get people to come out to local comic shops, and I wanted to ensure that I had something with me for him to sign because I'm getting his $60 package for an autograph and a photo. But when I read this book, I realized, wow, this is actually an amazing story. And even if you never saw the Time Force television series for Power Rangers, I still recommend reading it. Though it would help to go and watch the Time Force season first, because if you don't, chances are you're gonna get confused. This is a book that requires you to know the source material before you dive into it, because this picks up sometime after Time Force is over. And for those of you who never saw Time Force, I'm gonna need to break down a few things here. Because basically, Time Force starts off in the year of 3000, yes, like that Jonas Brothers song, Year 3000.
He told me he built a time machine, like one in a film I've seen, yeah. He said I've been to the year 3000, and not much has changed, but they lived underwater. And your great-great-great-granddaughter is doing fine, doing fine.
And in the year 3000, it opens with the Time Force Power Rangers Jen, Katie, Trip, Lucas, and Alex. Now, pay very close attention here, because what happens to Alex is important. Basically, Alex is Jen Scott's fiance, right? They're the co-leaders of the team, and the team took down the big, bad Rancic and his army of mutants. They think they've won the day, and Jen and Alex are getting ready to settle down. But then, Rancic ends up making his great escape, and this leads to Alex's tragic death. And this was one of the first on-screen deaths Power Rangers ever did. And it's just so crushing, because Alex basically dies in Jen's arms, and Rancic is traveling back 1,000 years into the past with his army to start some trouble. Jen and the other Rangers make the decision to go back to the year of 2000, and they travel to Silver Hills, California. And it's there that they meet a young man named Wesley Collins, who is the son of a billionaire that's running for mayor of the city. Now, here's the thing. Wes Collins is learned to be the ancestor of Jen's fiance, Alex Drake, who just died. So when Jen sees Wes for the first time, she instantly thinks he'll be compatible to have control over the red chronomorpher. And here's something that you need to know about Wes. He grew up privileged, rich. Basically, he's a spoiled brat, attending the same university as Eric Myers. And Eric is the antithesis of Wes. While Wes is arrogant, cocky, and just a spoiled brat, Eric grew up dirt poor, and he had to actually work for everything. Nonetheless, Wes tried to be a genuine friend to Eric, whereas Eric wanted absolutely nothing to do with him, because he saw Wes as the same, as the epitome of the rich and privileged, the guy that never had to work for anything in his life, which is something Eric greatly resents. So despite being a pampered brat, Wes actually has a lot of good to him, right? He's not a bad guy, and he's got a good heart. Let's get that out of the way. And with Wes joining the Time Force team, this changes him. It makes him mature. He finally starts becoming more disciplined, and it's through his time with the team that he begins to develop some genuine feelings for Jen. But the issue here is that Jen is from the future, so any feelings that she might have for him, she'll have to leave him behind to go back to her timeline. And through all of this, Wes's father, Mr. Collins, he forms the Silver Guardians, which Eric becomes part of. Then this leads to that famous moment of Wes's helmet getting cracked in battle, and his dad and Eric learn of his true identity as the Red Time Force Ranger. And this leads to Eric eventually becoming the Quantum Ranger, and after the Time Force Rangers win the day against Ransik again, Jen has to go back, and we get that famously heartbreaking moment of Jen and Wes holding each other, not wanting to say goodbye. Now, flash forward to the beginning of this book. It opens with Jen morphed and in battle, and it basically states that she is in trouble. Now, we don't know exactly why or how, but then we get this panel of Ransik and at least 2 of his followers, and that's how you really know something is up. Because for Ransik to be loose again, you know it's bad. This was the guy who killed Jen's first lover, Alex Drake. So yeah, long story short, Ransik, loose, equals trouble, major trouble. Flashback to the year of 2000, the past. And we see Wes and Eric with the Silver Guardians battling a handful of Cyclobots, and these things are Ransik's soldiers who are basically left over and are trying to avenge their captured master. Now, basically, Wes and Eric are trying to get these things to stand down, right? And Wes, who is still his cocky old self from the beginning of the show, I mean, you can't expect him to change too much, right? He realizes he's gonna be late for something, and he just takes off, leaving Eric hanging, and Eric's like, dude, don't just leave, there's too many of them, and Wes gets his ass handed to him with a punch to the jaw by a Cyclobot. Classic moment of him being too arrogant and too stubborn for his own good. It all comes back to bite him. And then that's when Jen comes in, and we realize why he's late. He's late for his meeting with Jen, because despite Jen being in another timeline altogether, they're trying for their romantic relationship here. They're attempting to have somewhat of a normal romance, which, given Jen's duties as the Pink Time Force Ranger, it's pretty impossible, right? So, after the battle is over, the couple sits down in a sushi restaurant because in the time constraint, Jen doesn't have much time to spend with him, and here they're reminiscing on Wes's days as the Red Time Force Ranger, laughing about Wes basically being a huge dork, and it's absolutely adorable, and they feel like a real couple. But then Jen ends up getting the call that she has to go back. Now, back in the year of 3006, Jen is talking with her Yellow Ranger, Katie, about how hard of a time she's having trying to balance a long-distance relationship. She goes on to asking their robotic owl companion, Circuit, about how to cope with it all, and Circuit's like, girl, the concept of love is so foreign for me. And Jen goes on to explain how having a lover who is basically 1,000 years away or so from her, it makes her wonder, what is normal? Because the way she and Wes got together in the first place is extremely unconventional, to say the least. They're not like most couples. Their relationship, their love, it's genuine. They're both passionately in love, but it's complicated, and that's what leads into what happens next. This leads to a meeting between Jen and her commanding officer, Captain Logan. Now, Captain Logan wants to basically debrief her on her time in Silver Hills, and he wants to make sure that Jen, Eric, and Wes's actions don't leave any permanent changes to their current present, the future. And when Jen reveals she and Wes had gone out to lunch, this is where Captain Logan tells her, did you use that opportunity to say goodbye to him? And Jen's like, what? And Captain Logan goes on to, explain to her that Time Force will be expanding, and he wants her to be the first to go through Hyperforce training. And Jen's like, wait, so you want me to break up with Wes to devote more time to the team? And Captain Logan goes, No, not exactly. What needs to happen is we need to wipe Wes's memory so he won't have any knowledge of the future. Now, this is very important because Wes and Jen's relationship in Power Rangers is they broke all the rules. They broke the laws of time itself when they fell in love. And Captain Logan points out, Wes technically died 900 years ago, Jen, and by you keeping a relationship with him like this, what could happen as a result? What if this leads to Alex Drake not joining the Time Force team? What if you never make it through the academy? What if this? What if that? Because by breaking the rules of time, falling in love with Wes, this could lead to radical changes to the timeline and mess up everything. And anyone who knows anything about time travel, this is bad. Okay, so continuing with my assessment / breakdown of Sins of the Future for Power Rangers, this couldn't come at a more fitting time because I just got off the high of meeting Wes Collins, the man himself, Jason Font, and he personalized and signed my copy of the book, and I got the chance to ask him lots of questions about his and JDF's movie, The Legend of the White Dragon. Single coolest moment of my life, and one of the coolest people you can ever meet. He is the man. Anyway, so we're picking up from where we left off after part 1. Now, when we ended part 1, we left things off with Jen Scotts being told by Captain Logan that they must wipe Wes's memory of ever being with her. This fades back to the year of 06. A bit of a correction on my part from last time where I said the past was centered around the year of 2000. It's 06, just for some clarification. And in the year of 2006, Wes is standing near his car waiting for Jen to arrive again, and luckily, he's there on time this time. For sure, making up for the last time he was late. And he's waiting there with pink and red roses, and his and Jen's reunion is so sweet and so romantic. But you also get this sense that things aren't going to be as happy as they were from last time. Last time, their date ended on a relatively nice, happy note, right? But this time, you know things are going to be different. And you know things are going to just take a turn from the inner monologue that Jen has here, where she explains how she's going to have to tell Wes that they can no longer be together, that he cannot have any knowledge of the future. Except Wes here, he doesn't allow her to even mention it, because Wes talks about how he's got a surprise for her, and he stops in front of Silver Hills' clock tower, and the clock tower was owned by Wes's dad, and Wes loaned it to the Time Force team as a base of operations. It was their home away from home during his tenure as the Red Ranger. But at the end of Time Force, the clock tower was destroyed by their enemies. And what this does is it sets the stage that things aren't quite right. Because for the clock tower to suddenly just be rebuilt like this means there's a rather big inconsistency. But Wes is so overwhelmingly happy to surprise Jen that he doesn't even care. Again, this shows Wes's naivety and recklessness, and this is important for you all to keep in the back of your minds for later. And as they climb up the clock tower, it's revealed that Wes had set up a romantic candlelit dinner for Jen, complete with champagne and Time Force Ranger themed red and pink cupcakes that he baked himself, and flowers. And again, this shows just how deeply Wes has grown to love Jen. But he's also pretty much at the honeymoon phase in his relationship with her. Right? The honeymoon phase is truly the point before you hit that roadblock and you realize that your relationship is just going to get more complicated. And how you deal with those complications beyond a certain point, that's the tough part. You either work through those complications together as best you can and sort of come to a middle ground, or one feels that they're putting in all the effort while the other half of them isn't bothering, and it's putting the brakes on their feelings. Having dated myself at one point, I know what that feels like to slowly fall out of the honeymoon phase. And it's not easy to deal with, believe me, but there's only so much crap anyone, especially a woman, can go through and take. But I do not by any means envy Jen or even Wes here at all, because what comes next sucks big time for them. The honeymoon phase quickly comes to a close, where Jen begins realizing, okay, something isn't adding up here. And then she suddenly yells out, "Wes, look out!" And the clock tower explodes, sending them crumbling down onto the ground, with Wes obviously suffering the worst injuries of the two of them. And before the two can even process what happened, they see another Time Force Ranger, a black Time Force Ranger at that. Now, remember back when we covered part 1, where there was that diagram Captain Logan was pointing to, talking to Jen about the Hyperforce training? Well, there was the color black in that palette, which, from what I can configure, is connected to this somehow. I think that was some foreshadowing on the writer's part, but we'll worry about that later. Anyway, this Black Ranger basically tells Jen that she is a traitor and that she destroyed the timeline and that she needs to pay for these supposed crimes that she committed. And before Wes and Jen can even fully morph, the Black Time Force Ranger lashes out and firmly believes that they've been eliminated. And Jen's monologue continues, explaining that she has to go back to the year of 3006 somehow, but the first thing she needs to do is she needs to worry about Wes, because he's clearly badly hurt, and she calls for Eric to come and pick him up and get him to a doctor, explaining that the clock tower has been destroyed again. And clearly Eric is confused by this, because this is the first time he's hearing about the clock tower being rebuilt based off the conversation Jen is having with him off panel. And Jen tells Wes, how could we have let this happen? And Wes is like, but we can fix it. And Jen tells him, no, that was a Black Time Force Ranger. This was my doing. This was my fault. We never should have gotten together. And Wes, he still is trying to convince her otherwise, saying, but we're a team. But Jen comes to this realization that this is a battle Wes cannot help her with, that she must do it on her own, and that means breaking up with him for not only his own good, but for the good of the future. And this is where Jen realizes she needs to cut herself off from her emotions. The mission needs to come first, and this truly does bring her back to that place that she was in mentally when Alex Drake got murdered right in front of her eyes. At that time, she couldn't afford to grieve and be emotional over Alex's death, and this is basically the same thing, albeit in a different capacity. She cannot afford to be upset over breaking things off with Wes because the mission comes first. And sure, this might make Jen seem very cold and a bit heartless, but she is the Time Force leader, first and foremost, and she will always go back to that mentality of needing to be the alpha of her pack. And if that means cutting herself off from her emotions, she'll do it. She's tough as nails, so independent. She endures and fights until the battle is over, and that's quite frankly why so many fans love her, because they're amazed at how strong and resilient she's able to be, even under the worst circumstances. She's a symbolism of how strong women can be, and this whole panel and the moments that come afterwards display that perfectly. And as Jen leaves, trying to remain as strong as possible, you see Wes is absolutely crushed, and that's how Eric ends up finding him. And man, Wes's reaction to Jen dumping him is just so raw. It goes to show how deep and hard he fell for Jen, and how the thought of her leaving him like this, it kills him. And it really does take you back to that final moment of them together in the Time Force finale, where they were holding each other, confessing their love. I mean, you can't help but feel for the guy, because Jen was the girl who truly changed him. She made him mature and develop a sense of discipline that Wes's own father couldn't. And just the pain on Wes's face here, man, it was drawn so well in these panels. But even so, Jen admits to herself in the next few panels that she cannot think straight, and granted, she's trying her hardest to hold it together, considering she just dumped her boyfriend, and she's trying to make her way back to her timeline. The future is in jeopardy, and she missed her opportunity to go back, and when she finally makes it back, she lands outside Katie's apartment, and this is where the wheels begin falling off here, because she goes off searching for her Yellow Ranger at her home, and she's immediately attacked from behind here by Katie, Circuit, Trip, and Lucas, who brand her a fugitive, and Jen cannot seem to even reason with them at all, because in this new timeline that she and Wes created together, basically, her teammates do not see her as their leader, but rather as a traitor, and Jen could easily surrender, right? But she doesn't. She fights back. She kicks butt, like she always does. And it is during this battle that she ends up meeting a reformed Nadira. Now, Nadira was one of Rancic's followers, specifically his daughter, and after Rancic willingly turned himself into the Time Force team and accepted his punishment, Nadira got set up by Lucas so she could get a lesser punishment and not have to go to prison. Keep that in the back of your minds. Now, Nadira takes Jen with her to her lab, and it is here that we get a bit of a breakdown of what's going on. Nadira explains to Jen that she is from a farther away future, and then this cuts back to Wes and Eric in the past, with Eric trying to help Wes through his breakup, and Wes, as you can pretty much figure, he is a mess. And Eric tries telling him, come on, man, you can't keep wallowing like this. You'll heal. You just need time. And this pretty much establishes to the readers that Eric is a lot more hardened than Wes, right? Even if you never saw the show, you're able to gather that Eric is the more resilient of the two, whereas Wes is prone to falling apart. Because Wes, before his time with Time Force, never really had to worry too much about being in a position where he could be emotionally tested. He had every ounce of financial security due to the lifestyle his father could provide for him, whereas Eric grew up needing to essentially have that every man for himself mentality, where nothing is stable and nobody is there for you. You need to handle it all yourself. And again, this panel shows just how different they truly are, yet there's also this strong camaraderie between these two. But before Eric can offer his comrade, his surrogate brother in every single sense of the word, any more sympathy, they get called to the Silver Guardian's base, and it is there that the men learn from their commanding officer that between the clock tower suddenly reappearing and the Cyclobots being more determined than ever to attack the city, that this means there's an anomaly with the timeline, and this leads to the Black Time Force Ranger attacking the Silver Guardian's HQ. Now, cut back to Jen and Nadira. Nadira's explanation continues here. She says the timeline, the past, has been altered, which changed their present. And we see panels of the past where Wes is getting attacked by this mysterious Black Ranger. And it is here that Nadira pulls up an email from Wes to Jen, and it basically explains the Black Ranger's attack had already happened. And Wes explains that this Black Ranger is female, and that given the chance, she will kill Jen, and that he and Eric don't have much time left, and that he loved Jen. Notice how he doesn't say, I love you, but rather, I loved you. Meaning, at this point, Wes and Eric have died. They haven't survived, and that email was his final act of communication with Jen. And it is then that Jen comes to the conclusion of, we must break into the Time Force base. We have to gather as much intel as possible. Because if she's going to change the past one more time to save Wes and prevent this future from happening, she'll need to take some major risks. And here, we get some inner thoughts from Jen, who tells us that she misses having a team. She misses at least having Wes and Eric as company, and that working with Nadira is weird, but at the very least, she's grateful for a friend. And this is pivotal, because this whole time, Jen has been going back to being her usual hard-ass self, giving us a little bit of insight to what she's thinking and feeling. We see her vulnerability and a side of her we, as the audience, rarely get to see. But by spending this kind of time with her, we realize Jen cannot do everything on her own. She needs a support system. Even if it's an old enemy, she'll take it whichever way it comes. And then this is when we get a panel featuring the death of Alex. And this is from the Black Time Force Ranger's perspective. Now, this is important because up until this point, we've only been getting Jen and Wes's points of view. Having the point of view from someone else gives us some insights into exactly what's going on. And by seeing these panels showcasing Alex's death from the pilot episode, we know that Alex's death is connected to this new Ranger. And this new Ranger essentially blames Jen for the death of Alex. But why? How did Jen kill Alex? She loved Alex. She would never do anything to bring harm to him, at least not intentionally. It was all Rancic, right? Or at least so we thought. Okay, so continuing with part 3 of Sins of the Future, it looks like this will be the final part of this story breakdown. We are at the home stretch to the end, people. And there's a whole lot to unpack here, and I will try my damn hardest to break all of this down in the simplest way possible. But then again, we're dealing with the Time Force Power Rangers here. Nothing is simple. So, I think a good place to start is where we left off last time. Just for a small recap, Jen and Nadira are about to break into the Time Force HQ to get access to any data about the Black Time Force Ranger. And we get this monologue from the Black Time Force Ranger, who basically says that she holds Jen responsible for Alex Drake's death. Now, moving on. The next couple of panels consist of Jen and Nadira breaking into the Time Force HQ, and the moment Jen enters, she's confronted with what looks like Rancic at his most powerful. But it is here that Nadira basically explains to her that what she is seeing isn't exactly real. These are all of Jen's memories that she is being confronted with from her future, the future she knew before she met Wes and Eric. And it is here that she sees these flashes of her life, particularly from when she was training in the academy to become a Time Force officer. And the lines are blurred between reality and what's fake. And this is pretty much going to set the tone for everything that we're about to discuss here. The only thing I'll tell you all is this: pay attention. That's all I'll say. So after Jen and Nadira basically fight their way through the headquarters, trying to find out exactly how this Black Ranger is traveling through the time stream without a ship, since that's the only known way to time travel at all. And this is when Jen is confronted once again by the Black Time Force Ranger, and the two get into a rather ugly confrontation, traveling through multiple time streams. All the while, the Black Ranger is blaming Jen for Alex Drake being murdered. And of course, Jen is confused because in her eyes, the only one responsible for Alex's death was Rancic. It was all on him. But this Black Ranger is so convinced that it was all Jen's fault, telling her, "You thought you could mess with the past by pursuing a relationship with Alex's ancestor, Wes Collins, not thinking about the consequences. So in turn, this is your fault." And to a point, the scary thing is, this Ranger is right to a certain degree, because Jen and Wes's love broke every single rule in the book about time travel. We've gone over this twice before, but the reason why I keep bringing it up is because Jen and Wes's love is the biggest sin anyone can ever commit. As pure as it might be, the issue is Jen is in love with the ancestor of her dead fiancé. Her heart is torn between Alex and Wes. And in turn, Wes had knowledge of the future, something that shouldn't have happened. I mean, haven't we learned anything from Eobard Thawne from The Flash? Didn't he speak about the consequences of time travel in Injustice 2? Does anyone remember?
I ran a long way from the future to hurt you, Barry. But this timeline, it's all wrong. So go back to your own time, Reverse Flash. Think I haven't tried? Your regime buddies killed one of my ancestors. Now I'm trapped in a paradox. I can never go home. At least I can hurt you!
Yeah, take a lesson from the Flash comics. Never mess with time itself. Barry Allen has screwed up enough timelines in his tenure, and I have no problem saying that even though he's my personal favorite Flash. Jen, I'm sorry to break it to you, but you did screw up. You and Wes. Not that she wasn't aware of that already, don't worry. I'm not gonna beat the dead horse anymore. I think I've scolded her and Wes enough here. Anyway, back to the action. So the battle between Jen and this black Time Force Ranger reaches its peak when Jen removes this Ranger's helmet, and the person that's revealed underneath leaves Jen in complete shock, because this girl is Syra Drake, Alex Drake's little sister, and it is here that we get a flashback of Syra and Alex, with Alex essentially training her for the day that she'll eventually become part of the Power Rangers. And from these panels, we can see that Alex and Syra had a very close relationship, and they loved each other very much, and Alex was protective of his little sister and vice versa. And so when Syra witnessed Alex get murdered by Rancic, it messed her up big time, and she feels that Jen and all the other Rangers let Alex just die. But Jen allowing it to happen hurt 10 times more, because Jen was going to be her sister-in-law. And ever since then, Syra has gone back in time, trying so many times to stop her brother's murder, and each time she just sees Alex die again and again. And at one point she even saw him die at Jen's hands. But this is the moment where Jen comes up with a peace offering, and she offers to help Syra figure out why all these timelines are so screwed up. And Syra realizes, wait, so if it wasn't you who allowed Alex to die, then who did? And this is where Jen examines Syra's chronomorpher, and she remembers what Captain Logan said about Hyperforce training, how in that diagram there was the color black. And when Jen and Nadira get a good look at it, they see a signature inside the morpher. The signature of Dr. Louis Ferrix. Now, Dr. Ferrix is quite important. And for those of you who haven't watched all of Time Force, I know I haven't. I'm guilty as charged. I'm going to do my very best to explain who Dr. Ferrix is based off what little understanding I do have. Thank God for Wikipedia pages. Basically, Dr. Ferrix was a man who at one point desired to try and cure Rancic of this poison that was slowly killing him. He was willing to help save Rancic's life despite him being a mutant, but Rancic, by that point, he was completely jaded by anyone who was human, thinking them all to be the same, and as a result, he heavily wounded Dr. Ferrix and left him for death. And as a result, Ferrix was left with this burning hatred of Rancic, and he transferred his consciousness into this villainous robot, Frax, pretending to side with Rancic and his army of mutants during the war, while secretly desiring to tear apart Rancic. He was basically what Finster was to Rita Repulsa, a drone who created every single monster the Rangers had to fight, while being underappreciated for his brilliance and developing a ton of resentment. So, the fact that his human form, Dr. Ferrix, created the black chronomorpher, this is important because the next panel we see, we're seeing a conversation between Dr. Ferrix and Captain Logan that occurred at one point. Dr. Ferrix created transwarp augmented morphers, which from what I can configure are more sophisticated versions of the chronomorphers the Time Force Rangers use based off what he is saying here. Now, this is important because the way Dr. Ferrix is talking here, he's talking about creating a device allowing for people to time travel without the specialty ships that the Time Force Rangers use, claiming it can prevent accidents and tragedies before they occur. And while this might seem noble, Captain Logan tells him that this could lead to a chronal genocide. And from the looks of it, this was around a time where Dr. Ferrix was building the Frax robot. So Jen goes on to saying that Ferrix allegedly destroyed these transwarp chronomorphers. But the fact that Syra has one, this just proves he BS'd Captain Logan. He didn't actually destroy them. And this is when Captain Logan shows up, and him showing up provides some further explanation about the inconsistencies that are occurring within the timeline. Logan basically explains to Syra that she went back in time and killed her brother's ancestor, but it doesn't seem that he's entirely framing her as guilty here, at least from what I'm able to gather, mostly because he points out that what Syra had been seeing, Jen being responsible for killing Alex, there's a rather huge anomaly with the timeline itself. And Syra says every time she witnesses Alex's death in these timelines, something changes dramatically, which further confuses her. So Nadira ends up patching through to her father and asks Rancic, who is now the new director, to break protocol. And the hilarious thing is, he's happy to do it, except when Nadira brings up the fact that they need information on Frax's lab, that's when Rancic changes his tune, and he's not willing to read any data about the individual who betrayed him. And Jen brings up to him that they need information particularly on this location that Syra had taken her to when they were battling through the time stream, a black site as they call it here, but Rancic tells them it's referred to as Outpost 1, and it's described by Rancic that this was the very place that allowed for Time Force to even be made possible because of its connection to the Morphin Grid. It's a power source outside the means of the conventional, and it's the castle between space and time itself. So Jen, Syra, and Nadira board Jen's ship, and they make their way towards Outpost 1. And in order to get there, they need to jam their way through the time stream, and they just crash inside. And it is here that the three women battle what look like enhanced versions of the Cyclobots. And the door to Outpost 1 just opens for them. The first sign of something being ominous. Here, this is where Nadira, Jen, and Syra see these flashes of Dr. Ferrix working on something, and it's explained that Ferrix was conducting experiments on the Cyclobots, and he says that after many trials and errors, he's begun to see the effects of time travel on the normal human mind. He tried to genetically alter his human volunteers to withstand the effects of time travel, but it unfortunately made them extremely weak, traveling back so many years, which, was substantial enough. So what he tried doing next was experimenting on the Cyclobots' exterior, and inside it, there's a young man from Eltar. Eltar, Zordon's home planet, the man who started it all on Earth. And this is when you know shit is getting real, because it's revealed that the Morphin Grid is reacting to the transwarp drive, and he asks this young man, whom he nicknames as Z, if everything is alright. And wait, Z as in Zordon? This is another one of those major WTF moments. It makes you wonder, was Zordon there at the time? Because think about it, a young man nicknamed Z, and he comes from Eltar? Is there any other possibility? And Nadira says that this was what started it all, with the chronal skips. Ferrix was altering the Morphin Grid, and I thought Grace Sterling does some pretty screwed up shit in the main comics right now, but this is another level. And then, when they go and access Dr. Ferrix's diaries, it's revealed that Ferrix created Venomark, the mutagen poison that was designed to kill mutants like Rancic and Nadira. The same poison Ferrix claimed he was creating a cure for. And Nadira does a good job at explaining this for the audience who didn't watch all of Time Force. I'm actually glad that they put this in here, because like us, Syra is out of the loop on a lot of what's occurring here. So, after Nadira explains all this, this builds up into a confrontation between this robotic clone of Frax known as Ferrix, Jen, Syra, and Nadira in Outpost 1's main frame. And Ferrix explains here that when Dr. Ferrix transferred his consciousness into Frax, he created a double to act as backup in case Frax didn't work out. And Ferrix here, he explains that by tapping into the Morphin Grid and traveling through the time stream, that he is using this as an opportunity to go back and fix all of Ferrix's mistakes. and in turn, he is planning on killing every single mutant in the future to prevent them from ever existing. And it's pretty clear why Ferrix left Ferrix behind. Ferrix is by far the most unstable thing to ever exist, if he sees this as saving everyone. And even Syra points out that what he plans on doing is committing a mass genocide. She points out that these mutants, they're people. They can be cured of the Venomark virus, that there's a chance their lives could be saved. And when Syra goes to fight him, Ferrix ends up tapping into the time stream through the Morphin Grid, and he decides to send her off where there are no humans, the prehistoric era. And so Jen ends up morphing, and this is the moment that is beyond badass for her. She says that by accepting the past, you're preserving it, and you're using that as a means to move forward. That you cannot just alter the timelines and expect that everything that went wrong will be fixed entirely. And she's completely right here in what she's saying. And it is after she defeats Ferrix that she realizes everything that's been occurring this whole time has been a paradox. And that's when Jen sees the Black Chronomorpher and she realizes, I need to get this back to Syra to prevent this paradox. And I need to go back in time to when she was a child, the year of 3000, before Alex died, before Time Force traveled to the year of 2000. And Jen does exactly that. And when she hands this morpher to Syra, she tells her to never, ever stop being loving. That even though Alex is going to die at some point in the future, she'll need to confront it and grieve and mourn, and tells her, once a Ranger, always a Ranger. And when Jen makes her way back to Outpost 1, she meets with a much older Syra who tells her, decades ago we stopped Ferrix. I've learned to move on from Alex's death, and now that the mission is over, I'm giving you my morpher. Hide it, ensure that no one else will get their hands on it. And Jen, as a result, crushes the morpher in her hand. And she goes on to say, no matter what happens, we need to accept the good and the bad that comes with it all. And when Syra walks away, this cuts to sometime later, in the past or the future. Whatever you decide to see it as, we see Jen and Wes reunited. I mean, now that things are fixed, Wes is obviously alive now. He's back, he's alright, and he's gotta be. If Wes weren't alive, do you think Jason Fonts could have come back for the 25th anniversary episode with JDF and Kat Sutherland? You just know in this book that even though Wes might have died at one point, there had to be a moment where he'd make a return. And this is that moment where he and Jen have one more dinner date, and Jen welcomes him to Outpost 1, and she tells him, I don't know if you remember, but at one point I was supposed to break up with some version of you. And Wes asks her, are we over? And she says, no, they're not. At least not yet. They're together, the way it should be. And Jen explains that Outpost 1 can be for anyone who at one point was a Power Ranger. Anyone with that connection to the Morphin Grid can access it. And Wes asks, is this the future or is it the past? And Jen says, no, it's neither. It's right now, the present. Talk about a beautiful, romantic, happy ending right there that I am a total sucker for. And that is it, everyone. That's the conclusion of Sins of the Future. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a comment down below and let me know your thoughts. Also be sure to check out my social media. Links will be down below in the description per usual. God bless, happy viewing, and have a nice day.